But if love had literally blinded Anakin, what would have happened then? We pick up with Anakin and Padme talking about how much they love each other. Let's begin. The night lights of Coruscant filled the apartment with a soft glow. Padme stood on the balcony, brushing her hair as she looked out at the city planet's endless streams of traffic. Anakin leaned against the doorway, watching her with undisguised adoration. The gentle sound of her brush moving through her hair mingled with the muted hum of distant speeders. "Annie, I want to have our baby back home on Naboo," Padme said softly. "We could go to the lake country where no one would know, where we would be safe. I could go early and fix up the baby's room. I know the perfect spot, right by the gardens," she said. Anakin's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You are so beautiful. It's only because I'm so in love," Padme replied with a gentle smile. "No, it's because I'm so in love with you," Anakin said, his voice full of conviction. "So, love has blinded you?" Padme teased, expecting their usual playful banter to continue. Anakin opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly his expression changed to one of confusion. He blinked rapidly, pushing himself away from the doorframe with uncertainty. "Padme, I can't..." His voice held a note of rising panic. "Everything's going dark. I can't see," he said. "Anakin?" Padme laughed softly, assuming he was playing along with her joke. But as she watched him stumble, his hands reaching out blindly, her smile faded. His usually bright eyes had become unfocused, searching wildly but finding nothing. "Anakin!" She dropped her brush and rushed to catch his arm. "I don't understand," he said, his free hand waving in front of his face. "It's all dark. What's happening?" His breath came in quick gasps now, the mighty Jedi Knight suddenly seeming very vulnerable. "3PO!" Padme called out, her political training keeping her voice steady, even as fear gripped her heart. "3PO, come quickly!" "Oh my!" The protocol droid shuffled onto the balcony. "Is something the matter, my lady?" "Contact security immediately. We need a medical transport to the nearest facility. Now!" She turned back to Anakin, who was now gripping the railing with white knuckles. "It's all right, Annie. I'm right here. We'll figure this out." Minutes later, Padme's personal transport, piloted by Captain Typho, streaked through Coruscant's skyways toward the prestigious Grand Republic Medical Facility. Through the viewport, artificial rain pattered against the transparent steel, another feature of Coruscant's entirely engineered environment. The city's weather control systems were working overtime tonight, creating a steady downpour over the medical district that reflected the glow of countless neon signs. But Padme noticed none of it, her attention fixed on Anakin as she gripped his mechanical hand. Their secret relationship was hardly a concern in this moment. Padme had long since realized that while no one dared speak of it openly, her security detail and staff had clearly chosen to look the other way. Between her status as a senator and his reputation as the hero with no fear, people knew better than to ask questions they didn't want answers to. Anakin had calmed somewhat, his initial panic giving way to confusion and frustration. Through the Force, he could sense shapes and movement, a different kind of sight, but not enough to navigate by. He could feel Typho's steady presence in the pilot's seat, the man's worried but disciplined mind focused on getting them to the medical center as quickly as possible. "I don't know what the criff is happening," Anakin muttered, his free hand clenching and unclenching. "One second I could see, and then..." Padme's voice took on a familiar, investigative tone as she spoke. "Did you take any death sticks today?" "No," Anakin answered. "Felucian fungus?" "No." "Master Yoda's concentrated spice blend?" Anakin actually turned his head toward her voice with a slight smirk. "Not since becoming a knight, Padme." "Kessel spice?" "No." "Real extract?" "Force no, Padme." "What about that Corellian X-7 stuff? Some clone troopers have been using it for combat fatigue." "No." "Lunaweed?" Anakin paused, considering. "And no." "Unpurified spice?" Another pause, longer this time. Anakin's Force presence flickered with guilt. That wouldn't cause this," he said carefully. "For Criff's sake, Anakin," Padme hissed. But any lecture was cut short as they arrived at the medical facility's private landing pad. The medical center's efficiency droids were already waiting as their transport touched down on the private landing pad. For the average Coruscant citizen, emergency care meant days of waiting in overcrowded public medical centers in the mid-levels, assuming they could even afford to leave the lower levels. But here they were, whisked immediately into the Grand Republic Medical Facility's most advanced diagnostic wing, without so much as a datapad to sign. Padme quickly instructed 3PO to contact Obi-Wan. If this wasn't just the aftermath of Anakin's apparent adventure with unrefined spice, it could be something Force-related. Maybe going blind is what turning to the dark side meant, Padme thought. The protocol droid soon reported that Master Kenobi was already en route. The medical droids guided Anakin into their specialized lab, a sterile white room filled with equipment worth more credits than most beings would see in a lifetime. The medical droids conducted a quick preliminary scan of Anakin's vital signs and neurological responses. Their initial assessment was reassuring. No signs of stroke, no evidence of physical trauma, all vital signs stable. Whatever had caused this sudden blindness, it wasn't life-threatening. With this basic examination complete, they prepared to move him to a more specialized diagnostic lab. They politely suggested that Padme wait outside, a request, not an order, carefully worded with deference to her status. Given their assurances about his stable condition, she didn't object. She moved to the vast transparent steel window outside the lab. The artificial rain created shifting patterns on the surface, distorting the endless stream of speeders and massive holographic advertisements beyond. Far below, billions of beings went about their lives in the endless levels of Coruscant. The galaxy itself held over 100 quadrillion sentient beings across its millions of inhabited systems. And here she was, one of only 2,000 senators in the Galactic Republic, married to the Chosen One himself. Her reflection stared back at her from the transparent steel. Young, beautiful, powerful. The mathematical odds of being born into such privilege, of rising to such heights, of finding herself at the center of such momentous events, it was so vanishingly small that she sometimes wondered if this was all some vast simulation. After all, wasn't it more likely she was just some wealthy being who'd paid to experience this life in a simulation pod somewhere? To feel what it was like to be one of the most powerful people in galactic history? She allowed herself a small, cold smile at the thought. The reflection of rushed footsteps appeared in the transparent steel before her. Obi-Wan Kenobi, his hair and robe still dripping from the artificial rain, looking very concerned as he hurried in. Each drop that fell from his cloak left a small, dark circle on the polished floor. Padme stayed focused on her own reflection as he spoke with the med staff and her security detail, their voices a distant murmur. It should have been Qui-Gon Jinn training Anakin, but the older Jedi's peculiar death had changed everything. The details were fuzzy in her memory, something about him defeating a Sith Spice Lord in an epic duel at the Naboo spice refinery, then promptly deciding to leap into a vat of unrefined spice in search of what he called the ultimate enlightenment. The official reports were heavily redacted, but rumor had it his last words were about seeing through the great illusion of the Force before taking that final, questionable plunge. That left Obi-Wan with the responsibility of training Anakin, and Padme had always felt he wasn't suited for it. Not because he'd almost been sent to the Jedi wheat farms for poor performance. No, the problem was that she could tell Obi-Wan looked for a brother in Anakin, while Anakin desperately sought a father in Obi-Wan. She'd watched their dynamic play out over the years. Obi-Wan's attempts at fellowship, meeting Anakin's constant need for guidance and approval. This unfulfilled need, this fundamental misalignment, was what had allowed Palpatine to get so close to Anakin. She knew well that Palpatine was clearly in search of something from her husband, though what exactly she could not say. The Chancellor's too-perfect grandfatherly concern always seemed calculated, like every word was carefully chosen. Through the reflection, she watched Obi-Wan's approach, his wet boots leaving a trail across the immaculate floor. For a moment, she began mentally preparing responses to his inevitable questions before letting the effort fade. She was rather enjoying this disconnected state of mind, this sensation of watching events unfold like a holovid. "What happened to Padme?" Obi-Wan asked, his reflection joining hers in the transparent steel. The artificial rain created a shifting pattern of shadows across his concerned face. "Spice overdose," Padme said flatly, watching his reflection's reaction. "It's your fault, really, being such a bad influence on him," she added. "If anyone's to blame, it's Master Yoda," Obi-Wan replied with practiced dignity, straightening his already straight robes. "And I've never given anyone any spice." The defensive tone in his voice suggested otherwise. Padme just shook her head, maintaining her gaze out the window, watching the endless streams of traffic weave between the buildings like luminous threads. "The rest of the council might appear soon," Obi-Wan ventured after an uncomfortable silence. "If you remain here, they might become suspicious." His reflection cast a meaningful glance at her swollen belly. She turned to face him then, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth as she slipped into her practiced senatorial persona. "Suspicious of what, Master Jedi?" she asked with perfectly crafted smug innocence, knowing full well that no one would dare voice their suspicions. Anakin was too valuable, the face of the Grand Army of the Republic itself. While she wielded more influence in the Senate, than most beings could dream of. Their combined fame made them practically untouchable. Obi-Wan tried to dance around the implication a few more times, his hands making those characteristic negotiator gestures. But Padme maintained her mask of confusion until he finally gave up and sank into a nearby chair. The delicate dance of unspoken truths might have continued indefinitely, if not for the chaos that burst through the door in the form of Representative Jar Jar Binks, his ears flapping wildly as he careened into the room. "Padme, Padme!" Mesa heard about Annie. "What happened? Is he being okay?" The Gungan rushed to her side, his eyes wide with genuine concern. Before she could even respond, Jar Jar dropped to his knees in front of her and raised his hands skyward. "Oh, merciful Balm Top," he began wailing, rocking back and forth. "What if poor Annie dies? What will happen to Padme, to their unborn baby? Who will help with these spice shipments from the huts? Who will—" Padme just stood there, watching this display with an unreadable expression. After what felt like an eternity, she placed a hand on his arm. "Jar Jar, please sit down. We'll have answers soon." Her voice remained steady despite the massive headache forming behind her eyes. She glanced around the room. Not a single person would meet her gaze. The security detail suddenly found their data pads fascinating, and even Obi-Wan seemed intensely interested in a spot on the floor. There was no point in damage control. Jar Jar somehow understood things only when he wasn't supposed to. The 2-1B medical droid emerged from the examination room. "One person close to the patient may enter. We have a preliminary assessment of his condition." Before it could even finish the sentence, all 3 of them rushed past: Padme, Obi-Wan, and a still sniffling Jar Jar. The droid's vocabulator made a small sound of protest, its mechanical arm raising uselessly as they brushed past. Its programming prevented it from physically stopping a senator, let alone a Jedi Master. And Jar Jar just followed them in. Anakin lay on the examination bed, a slight grin on his face. "Hey, it's all my favorite people," he said, his voice carrying the distinctive lazy warmth of someone under mild sedation. "We administered a small dose of Niax to keep him calm," the medical droid explained. "His force sensitivity appears to be compensating somewhat for the vision loss. He can detect presence and movement, though not with normal visual acuity." "What happened to him?" Padme and Obi-Wan asked simultaneously, while Jar Jar waved his hand in front of Anakin's unfocused eyes. The medical droid's optical sensors flickered as it consulted its database. "The patient appears to be experiencing a case of conversion disorder, with visual subtype, specifically triggered by intense emotional stimulation. In layman's terms, an overwhelming surge of neurotransmitters has temporarily disrupted the neural pathways between his visual cortex and conscious awareness. This is a documented phenomenon where extreme emotional states, including those associated with intense feelings of love or affection, can manifest in physical symptoms." The droid paused, his mechanical voice somehow managing to sound both clinical and bemused. "Given the timing and trigger of the episode, we can say quite literally that love has blinded him. The condition is temporary, of course. His vision should return within 24 to 48 hours. Padme's hands slowly rose to her chest as the implications sank in. Tears welled in her eyes. Anakin's love for her was so profound, so overwhelming, that it had literally overwhelmed his neural pathways. She found herself reaching for Anakin's hand, even as Jar Jar continued waving in front of his face. Moving closer, she took his flesh hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. The Niax was clearly hitting him hard now. His mechanical hand reached up, attempting and failing several times to find her ear. "I love you too, Annie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. So much." "Your ear, is it still there?" His mechanical fingers finally found their target, poking her ear with perhaps more force than intended. She squeezed his hand as he drifted in his Niax-induced haze. "How are you feeling, Anakin?" Obi-Wan asked once Padme had settled beside Anakin, holding his hand against her cheek. "Obi-Wan, I haven't felt this good since—" Anakin's unfocused eyes crinkled with a loopy smile. "Since that time I smoked Felucian mushrooms with Padme." Fresh tears rolled down Padme's cheeks as she pressed her face closer to his hand. Meanwhile, Anakin's mechanical hand now tugged on Jar Jar's ear flap playfully. "Mesa's so happy you're feeling better, Annie," Jar Jar exclaimed. "I am happy too," Anakin said dreamily. "Everyone I love is here." Though his foresight let him sense the shapes and presences around him, he still found himself squinting uselessly at empty space. The Niax making him forget his eyes weren't doing the seeing anymore. His hands traced wobbly patterns in the air. "Wait, where's the one that's like—" His fingers outlined what seemed to be head-tails, following the Force signature he was trying to remember. "The shape, Togruta shape," Anakin finally managed. Obi-Wan's brow furrowed before understanding dawned. Ah, Ahsoka. We sent her to Mandalore to arrest that Spice Lord Darth Maul, Anakin. Don't you remember? He's been running a spice operation without paying the Jedi cartel their cut. Obi-Wan explained. Oh, and what about the small one? My little green friend. Anakin made a vague gesture with his hand just above the bed. Oh, Yoda. Obi-Wan stroked his beard. Still under house arrest for welfare fraud. But I'm certain he is with us in spirit, Anakin. Padme's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at this, but she remained focused on Anakin, her fingers gently tracing his cheek as he continued to poke at her ear with his free hand. After a while, Anakin finally drifted off to sleep, his hand still loosely holding Padme's. The medical droid informed them he would be unconscious for a couple of days, but his vision would be fully restored when he awoke. Padme leaned close to him, still holding his hand against her cheek. I'll be right back, Annie, she whispered softly. I'm just going to arrange for better security, get you a proper room. She pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Don't worry, my love, I won't be gone long. With visible reluctance, she finally let go of his hand and left with Obi-Wan and Jar Jar. In the hallway, she found herself smiling. How many beings could say they'd found someone who loved them so deeply they actually went blind from it? These kinds of attachments are dangerous, Obi-Wan said, pulling out a Kessel Ruby Spice cigar. He produced an ornate gold lighter, a souvenir from some particularly aggressive negotiations on Malastare, and lit his cigar with practiced ease. Such intense emotions could lead Anakin to the dark side, Obi-Wan added. Something in Padme snapped. A deadbeat like you wouldn't understand, she spat, turning on him. Anakin and I would die for each other. Meanwhile, you abandoned your own child and the woman who loved you. I don't know what you're talking about, Padme, Obi-Wan said, but his hand trembled slightly as he took a drag, avoiding eye contact. Padme turned to Jar Jar. Jar Jar, did you know Obi-Wan has a son on Mandalore named Corky Kryze? The mother is Duchess Satine Kryze of Mandalore. He's never even visited him. Satine reached out so many times, and he ignored her. The only time this deadbeat showed up on Mandalore was when Darth Maul started his spice operation there. Then suddenly he's there, blowing up refineries that Maul had paid the Mandalorian authorities to set up, destroying Satine's diplomatic arrangements. That's not how it happened, Obi-Wan started, but the words seemed to die in his throat. Padme turned to Jar Jar. Let me tell you how it really happened, Jar Jar. Instead of competing fairly when Maul started making his 99.6% pure spice, the Jedi cartel destroyed his lab and harassed him out of the Outer Rim. So he goes to Mandalore, does everything by the book, gets permits, regulatory approval, follows trade laws. Then this one, she jerked her thumb at Obi-Wan, pretends he wants to reconnect with Satine, shows up, blows up all of Maul's legitimate factories, cuts him in half, and disappears again. She shook her head in disgust. And somehow that waste of oxygen, Maul, survived getting cut in half. Now he's shipping spice through the Mandalorian tunnels. But since Satine put out an arrest warrant against Obi-Wan, the Jedi cartel had to send their child soldier Ahsoka to deal with it instead. Bunch of deadbeats, all of them. Padme, you don't understand, Obi-Wan started. What's to understand? Padme cut him off. You deadbeats sit in your council chamber all day, getting high, putting out hits, ignoring your kids. That's not true, Obi-Wan protested weakly. Padme's look of disgust deepened. You'll never understand what Anakin and I have, you deadbeat. Padme then raised her hood and began walking away from the Jedi Master. The transparent steel corridor stretched before her, leading directly to her ship's private landing pad. Rain-slicked towers and streams of speeders painted the city in light and shadow, fully visible through the corridor's transparent walls and ceiling. Yet Padme's focus didn't waver. Station my personal guards outside Anakin's room. They report directly to me every 30 minutes, she instructed to her personnel. Her handmaidens hustled to keep pace, datapads in hand, swiftly noting her instructions. She paused briefly at the top of the ship's ramp, her voice calm but firm. And bring me the finest Felucian mushrooms available. They're Anakin's favorite. Price is no object. Without hesitation, her personnel made their notes, none daring to question the unusual request. Back at the medical center, Obi-Wan turned to Jar Jar, still trying to justify himself. She doesn't understand how things really are. Satine has me blocked, and that child doesn't even look like me. His face is just off. May's not so sure, Obi, Jar Jar offered gently, his ears bobbing. Kids can have all kinds of looks, you know. Obi-Wan huffed and flicked on his datapad, revealing a hollow image of Corky with features that, while clearly human, looked oddly stylized. Take a good look, he muttered, angling the display so Jar Jar could see. Does that resemble me in any way? Jar Jar squinted, then shrugged uneasily. Well, Mesa, guess it's kinda different, but not impossible. Snapping the datapad shut, Obi-Wan activated his comlink and said, "Send 2 knights to guard Skywalker, and keep me updated on his condition." With a final glance at Anakin's room, he strode off with Jar Jar, leaving only the quiet hum of medical instruments behind. The council chamber was hazy with smoke when Obi-Wan arrived. He delivered the news about Anakin's condition, and the gathered council masters, or cartel gangsters as they are widely regarded, immediately began voicing their displeasure. 2 days? Plo Koon growled. "The operation can't wait." "Calm yourselves," Mace Windu cut in, his fingers drumming against his armrest. "Getting worked up won't speed up Skywalker's recovery." A grating sound drew everyone's attention as Yoda shifted in his tiny chair. The electronic ankle monitors on each leg caught the light as he repositioned himself. "Without Skywalker, killing Palpatine, difficult it will be." Mace nodded grimly. "Yes, we need him gone as soon as possible. Every day that son of a Hutt stays alive, he delays our operations further. This whole war nonsense has given him too much power and set us back decades." Ki-Adi-Mundi leaned forward through the haze. "Any progress on the Kashyyyk front, Master Windu? My contract laborers from the Outer Rim are already standing by to begin planting the Luna weed. Once we clear out those Wookiees and spiders, we can move ahead with cultivation. But without that bombardment authorization..." Mundi let the words hang. Mace's expression darkened. "Palpatine's demanding a full investigation into our reports about separatist activity on the surface. Says he needs concrete evidence before authorizing any orbital bombardment." "Accept our word at face value." "He no longer does," Yoda grumbled, the monitors blinking as he shifted again. "This bullshit," persisted Cannot. The cartel members murmured in agreement. The fact that no actual separatist forces had been spotted on Kashyyyk was, in their view, beside the point. Mace turned his attention to Obi-Wan, suddenly having remembered something. "Master Kenobi, while you were dealing with Skywalker's situation, we received news from Mandalore." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Our child soldier seems to have convinced Maul to negotiate." "What kind of negotiation?" Obi-Wan asked, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "He's offering to reveal his method for that 99.6% pure blue spice refinement. In exchange, he wants free reign to conduct his business in the Outer Rim hellholes." Mace waved his hand dismissively. "Places so worthless even we don't bother with them." "He doesn't want to risk getting cut in half a third time," Obi-Wan observed. "Indeed," Mace nodded. "But there's more. He claims to have some useful information for us. Says we'll find it particularly interesting. The meeting is set for a few hours from now. The entire council will attend via hologram." "Then we wait," Obi-Wan said. The council chamber fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the soft beeping of Yoda's ankle monitors. Hours later, Obi-Wan sat with the rest of the cartel masters in the council chamber, waiting for the connection to be established. The delay was becoming frustrating. Even Kit Fisto had stopped sampling the confiscated goods long enough to check his chronometer. Obi-Wan's thoughts drifted to Anakin. The medical droid's latest report confirmed he was still unconscious, but they'd assured everyone this was expected to last at least another day. What was less expected was the update about Padme. She had apparently stormed back into the medical facility and refused to leave Anakin's side. Security hadn't dared stop her. Obi-Wan shook his head slightly. Such connections were beyond his understanding. His contemplation of emotional attachments was suddenly derailed, much like their planned orbital bombardment would soon derail Wookiee housing developments, as the hologram finally stabilized. Ahsoka Tano's blue-tinged figure materialized before the council. The hologram showed Ahsoka standing rigidly, her expression neutral. "The Sith Spice Lord has a statement for the cartel," she announced. A second figure stepped into view, Maul's distinctive horned silhouette and mechanical legs casting an imposing presence even through the blue-tinted hologram. "I'm prepared to share my refinement process with your organization," Maul began. "Your product is embarrassingly impure. In exchange, I want freedom to conduct business in the Outer Rim territories." "A cut of your profits we will require," Yoda interjected. Maul's eyes narrowed. 20% of all future profits is all I can offer the cartel." He paused, mechanical legs shifting. "However, I have something far more valuable to offer. Information about a threat that endangers us both. It's the real reason I agreed to this arrangement. Running operations in the Mandalorian tunnels is difficult enough without dealing with both your harassment and this other concern." Mace leaned forward, fingers steepled. "What threat?" he asked. "The Sith you have been chasing all these years with no luck. The one who taught me everything I know about the dark side and spice refinement, Darth Sidious." Maul's eyes gleamed. "You know him better as Chancellor Palpatine." The council members exchanged skeptical glances. Ki-Adi-Mundi scoffed. Yoda's ears twitched in disbelief. You expect us to believe, Mace began, but Maul cut him off by activating a small holo projector. The recording was from some worthless forest moon called Endor. A heavily intoxicated Palpatine and an equally high Maul, still with his original legs, were sprawled on fallen logs, watching a group of spice-addled primitives attempting to devour each other. The little furry test subjects, Palpatine wheezed between fits of maniacal giggling. The younger Maul could barely hold the recording device steady as he doubled over with laughter. I'd completely forgotten about this myself until recently, Maul admitted, as the recording showed both Sith Lords dissolving into uncontrollable laughter at their market research. Maul's yellow eyes took on a distant look. We were close once, you know. Master and apprentice, sure, but more than that. Like father and son, planning to rule the spice trade together. He gestured at the recording where both Sith were barely containing their hysteria. Found this buried in some old files. Even Sidious doesn't remember it exists. His voice hardened, just like he tried to forget about me after I failed to kill Kenobi and that spice-addled fool Qui-Gon at the Naboo refinery. Tossed me aside, like yesterday's death sticks. And now, look where we are. He let out a harsh laugh. Funny how things work out. The council chamber fell silent except for the sounds of the two Sith Lords' recorded hysteria. We were planning to kill him anyway, Kenobi said dismissively, smoke curling from his latest cigar. Maul's hologram flickered as he let out another laugh. You think Sidious is just another politician you can kill and dump under a bridge? He's a Sith Lord of unprecedented power. He's been manipulating both sides of this war, positioning himself to control the entire galaxy's spice trade. Maul leaned closer to the transmission device. He seeks to resurrect the ancient Sith spice empire that Darth Bane envisioned. And he's close to succeeding. Maul's eyes narrowed. Unlike the rest of you addicts, Sidious doesn't get high on his own supply. He's ice cold, calculating. That's what makes him so dangerous. The man's never been high a day in his life. Except for that one time when I was granted the rank of Darth, which is what you just saw. Still just one man against the entire Jedi Order, Mace countered, though there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. When was the last time any of you properly used a lightsaber? Maul's question hung in the smoke-filled air. Obi-Wan absently fingered his saber hilt, remembering how he'd used it earlier that day, to light his Luna Weed cigar. The silence in the chamber was telling. Do we have a deal, Jedi? Maul pressed, yellow eyes gleaming through the blue-tinted hologram. Yoda shifted in his seat. Revisit this issue once Sidious is dealt with. We will. For now, our agent on Mandalore will leave your operation alone. Maul nodded, knowing this bought him time, at least until they had his refinement recipe. But something told him the Jedi cartel might not be his problem for much longer. The transmission ended, and the council chamber erupted into movement. The entire cartel leadership began preparing to move toward the executive building. Yoda, despite his house arrest, rose from his seat with grim determination, the electronic ankle monitors blinking steadily as he moved. This threat was far too great for him to remain behind. The consequences of breaking house arrest paled in comparison to letting Sidious consolidate his power over the galaxy's spice trade. They'd recorded Maul's testimony, of course. After they killed Palpatine, they could edit and play select portions to justify their execution of the Supreme Chancellor to the galaxy. The council members strode into Palpatine's office, their robes billowing dramatically despite the complete lack of wind. Yoda entered first, using the Force to throw two Senate guards against the wall, their bodies crumpling to the floor. The Supreme Chancellor slowly turned his chair toward them. I hear a new spice empire you have, Supreme Chancellor. Or should I call you Supreme Gangster? Master Yoda, you broke house arrest, Palpatine replied smoothly. Surprised? Your former apprentice has ratted you out, Sidious, Yoda said, pulling out a small holoprojector. Recorded testimony we have. He activated the device, and the recording from Endor began playing. A heavily intoxicated Palpatine cackling as spice-saddled Ewoks devoured each other. Palpatine's face tightened almost imperceptibly as his past self continued giggling at his primitive market research. Over, your operations are, the Grand Gangster of the Jedi Cartel stated.